Hi, welcome to History 1302 U.S. History since 1877. Now, this is going to be a orientation for the final exam. So, this is a very short, very brief guidance, if you will, for completing the final exam. Before we start uh, going over the instructions, um, it is very important to keep in mind that we're moving into the third part of the summer session. This is the final part, the third session, the third part, which again is going to cover three topics: the seventh, eighth, and ninth topics. I already sent you an email over, on that announcement, indicating that you're supposed to be watching now the video sessions for the seventh topic, which is World War II. The eighth topic is going to talk about the Cold War, and the ninth topic is going to cover the counterculture revolution and the civil rights movement. Those are the last three topics of the semester. And the final exam is going to cover those last three topics only. So the final exam is not going to be comprehensive. It's not going to cover everything we have covered since the beginning of the class. Okay. So in many respects, the final exam is going to be very, very similar to the second, particularly the second exam, um, because in the final exam, as in the second exam, um, you're only required to, for part one, which again, part one is really of the exam, is the part that you're supposed to just answer the questions of one topic and just one topic alone. And that's exactly what is required in the final exam. Again, that you pick only one topic, either the seventh or the eighth topic, either World War II or the topic on the Cold War, and answer all of the questions on that topic and only that topic alone. Again, it's very similar in that regard to the second exam. There's going to be, of course, a part two, and part two is going to require you to identify, define very fully, and explain very fully a couple of key terms extracted from the ninth topic of the semester on the countercultural revolution and the civil rights movement. So really, the ninth topic, everybody has to watch. The three sessions, everybody has to watch um, that topic, because everybody, is required to address the key terms again, and the key terms comes from the ninth topic. So again, you cannot escape, watching the ninth topic. But in terms of the seventh and the eighth topic of the semesters, well, um, you're gonna have to choose whether to focus on World War II or focus on the Cold War. There's a lot of overlap, if you will, between those two topics, uh, due to the fact that, again, those two topics deals with international relations, international affairs, the United States getting involved abroad, overseas. Again, in World War II, it was, again, getting involved, of course, in the wars against Japan in the Pacific and against Hitler and in Europe. And the Cold War, the eighth topic, deals with the United States also getting very much involved in international affairs. In this case, confronting the expansion of communism around the world, sponsored by the Soviet Union, of course. So you choose. World War II and the Cold War are very fascinating topics, and they're very extensively explained in those video sessions, very thoroughly explained. So, that's your choice. Okay, so now let us now move to the instructions. Let me put the instructions here on display so we can get going with all right. Okay, so here it is. Um, so the final exam, very similar to the previous exams in that this is also something that you do at home. It's a writing assignment once again, in which your main source of information are the recorded video presentations that are already uploaded on Blackboard. So again, you don't need to really consult any other source. It's very important that you understand that. I've been emphasizing this over and over again because some students insert data from outside sources, whether from books or encyclopedias or articles, again. And um, it's not that it's wrong, it's just that in this class, the format of this class is that the information is being presented, is being delivered to you in those video presentations. So I'm actually giving you not only data as far as names and dates of historical events, but um, I'm also giving you analysis. Analysis means as to why things happen in the past. Why? There's an analysis there, of course, an explanation of why events arise, emerge in history. Okay. So that's why I'm actually requiring you to only focus on the video presentations as your main source and only source of information when you're answering the questions of part one or you're answering the key terms of part two. Okay, so once again, is very identical again to the previous exams. There's two main parts, part one and part two. And as I mentioned, part one, you're only required to either address the seventh topic of the semester, World War II, or the eighth topic of the semester, the Cold War. And that's again, there's a series of questions. Let me just scroll down here so you can see the questions below again. So choose just one topic and answer all the questions fully. And so for the seventh topic, if you decide to address World War II, there's going to be about 5 main questions. And all you need to do is just answer those questions as fully as possible in that order. So again, there's no superstructure. Once again, there's not like an essay format in which you write a topic paragraph and, main arguments and so on, and then a conclusion, but rather just look at the question and answer each question as fully as possible. And it's very important that you know, write extensively. And again, in the video sessions, I really spent a lot of time really explaining, for example, the causes of World War II. What were the causes of World War II? And I explained, for example, this is just, again, a brief example, that there were, um, in Europe after World War One, there was a vacuum of power, an absence of leadership due to the fact that at the end of World War One, despite the fact that there was a winning side, okay, the British and the French ended up defeating the Germans and the allies of Germany. Despite that fact, everybody was really, really weak. And all of the nations of Europe that wage war on each other were really weakened. After really spending enormous resources, human resources, material resources, fighting each other. So again, there was at the end of World War One really the absence of a leader. In other words, there was no strong nation that could maintain stability and peace in Europe, and so that really again led certain nations in Europe, like Germany and Italy, to take advantage again of that weakness, if you will, and re-emerge once again to challenge the former leaders of Europe. The former leaders of Europe were Great Britain and France for domination. Again, so we're going to see again mobilization, rearmament by the Germans, particularly the Germans, also the Italians, and also in the Pacific, Japan is also going to take advantage that the Europeans were weak and that they were not going to challenge Japan. Japan's ambitions in China. Japan also wanted to colonize China and other Asian societies as well, build an empire in Asia. So we're going to see again the rise of very strong and hostile nations, after World War One because of this vacuum of power. I also talk about other issues such as the Great Depression was another factor that led to the Second World War. The Great Depression of the 1930s really opened the door for nations to become very aggressive in this case because they lacked resources, because of the lack of money, the lack of employment, the lack of food that nations around the world experienced. They lacked those resources. Well, some nations became very aggressive, expanding their boundaries and trying to get resources from their neighbors, trying to seize again lands from other countries. And particularly Japan, Germany, and Italy were the leaders of those very aggressive nations that were expanding during the 1930s, during the Great Depression. Again, so I talk about that. I also talk about how some nations became very closed off, very isolated. They didn't really want to pay attention to the outside. For example, the United States in the 1930s, it was so concerned about the Great Depression that it did not pay attention again to events outside. For example, what Germany was doing, what Japan was doing. Yeah, Americans knew about it, but again, the Great Depression just convinced Americans that it was unnecessary to intervene in foreign affairs when here at home there was a lot of problems, economic problems, like unemployment, lack of housing, lack of food, and so on. Again, so I talk about all of those issues. You're supposed to be explaining in great depth again, every issue. This is just an example. I'm not going to, explain everything. Just you're supposed to watch the videos again. And I really provide a lot of reasons why there will be another world war exploding in 1939, the Second World War. Okay, so that's what I'm expecting when I'm reading your answers. You're supposed to be, explaining in detail those, not only those events, but also the analysis as to, okay, so why this war took place, for example. There's a multiple causes for that. Okay, so that's what I'm expecting, that you write extensively, you provide a lot of details and explanation. And again, that's the only way I can measure how much you have learned in this class, the material that I have presented to you, that is to say. So if you skip data, if you decide that certain things are not important, or you're just in a rush, you just want to finish as quickly as possible, well, that's going to affect your final grade at the end, because what you want is to earn 70 points in part one. Again, it is very important that the bulk really of your grade is in part one, but at the same time, part two is very important, because part two is going to give you 30 points. So what I've seen in the past is that some students, when they get to part two, they just really are in a rush, and they just want to finish off, even though they earned 70 points in part one. They probably feel very confident that their work was very, very well done. And so when they move to part two, they underestimate, how important this part is for really jumping the C, which, because again, in part one, you can only get a C in your final exam, and the exams, by the way. But for part two, you have the opportunity to take that C and make it into a B or an A. Okay, so that's why I am, insisting that you really spend some time also answering the key terms, because you want to get as many points as possible, again, to get a very good grade. This is the last exam, so you really want to end the semester with the highest grade possible. So part two, it's also very important. And part two comes from topic number 9, that is the countercultural revolution and the civil rights movement. And here, you're only required to address 2 key terms. Again, just two, okay? 2 key terms, and they're listed there. The countercultural revolution is the first. The existentialist movement is the second. the historical roots and development of the civil rights movement. That's the third. And the civil rights legislation. That's the fourth. Um, now, um, I highly recommend again that you spend some time watching this nine topic as fully as possible and take notes as thoroughly as possible because I'm expecting extended answers. I mean, just to give you an example, for example, when I talk about, let's say, key term number three, the historical roots and development of the civil rights movement, you know, what I do there is that I focus on the main groups that participated in the civil rights movement, in this case, women, Mexican Americans, and African Americans, and I look at their historical struggle, going back centuries into the past. In terms of women, I go back thousands of years, as minorities. In other words, what was the experience like of those minorities in societies in which they had very little opportunities to succeed economically, let alone politically? Okay. What women experience, for example, for thousands and thousands of years, under a male dominated world, all over the world. So I really talk about that. I really go back again to really explain the historical conditions of those groups, like women, for example, living, in a male-dominated world, not being able to own property or inherit any property, or in most cases, not even, have a say in the world of politics as well. Women were relegated to just be in the house, raising children, taking care of the family, and so on and so forth. And so I really explain how in the 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution, we see the women's liberation movement, how women began to liberate themselves from those limitations that men imposed upon them again for thousands of years. I talk about that, gradually how women began to liberate themselves and so on, going to work, earning wages, getting an education, going to school, and organizing politically, to petition the right to vote, the right to earn equal pay, with men as well. And also support other causes like the abolition of child labor, the abolition of slavery, for example. Women were very much involved in that. So that is just an example, of how rich, if you will, in details. I go over the struggle, the historical struggle of each minority, like women, and I do the same thing with Mexican Americans, and also African Americans as well. Each group separately, again, I really explain the background. It's not just enough to say, well, in the 1950s, this is what women were going through, and Mexican Americans and African Americans, that is a historical, condition, what they have experienced, if you will, as a minority. So that's just an example of the kind of answer that you're supposed to provide, when you're addressing. So again, I'm really expecting, more and more data, more details. It's not just, a small sentence or a couple of sentences, just see yourself as the teacher. So if you're explaining this to a friend or you're explaining this to a crowd, to a group of people or a group of students, the more you explain, the more they'll understand. Okay. So the more you write, the more I'll know, in this case, that you have learned the material. So when you're writing, just pretend that you are like the instructor, you are the teacher, and you're writing to the audience, if you will, that does not know anything about history. So again, that's a very good starting point for you to be able to write extensively, look at the key term and say, okay, so, how will I explain this to an audience, the historical roots and development of the civil rights movement? And it's all in the videos, by the way. So, you take each minority, women, and you explain the struggle of women for thousands of years, the struggle of Mexican Americans in the United States, and their contributions to the American economy, and also the struggle of African Americans in the United States for centuries since the 1600s. And since the starting of the colonies, the British colonies, again, we see the introduction of African slaves and so on. I talk about all that and the contribution of slave labor to the growth and development of nations and empires, like the British Empire, for example, grew out of sugar agriculture. That was done by the work of slaves, for example. Cotton agriculture was instrumental for the growth and development of the Industrial Revolution, both in Great Britain and the United States. So each of those minorities have contributed to the development, to the economic development of countries like the United States, for example. So again, so you're supposed to be writing extensively in order to earn full points. So if I see that it's just, a very brief answer, a small paragraph on each, again, that's not going to give you enough points even to get a low B. If you earn the 70 points in part one, you still need to earn at the very least 10 points to get an 80. But you don't want that. You want to earn, a B plus or an A. Why not? Just shoot for the A, and you'll get it. All right. So at any rate, so going back to, to the instructions, the answers and the key terms must be typed. This is something that you do at home in your own schedule. Use the regular format for colleges and universities. Is a 12 font Times New Roman, double space, your page number, the document, and you put a cover page with all your information there. And for part one, just part one, you must have 5 full pages. Again, that's just for part one. Okay, that's very important. Just for part one alone, I'm expecting 5 full pages double spaced. Okay, I'm raising the bar a little bit because it's the final, and by this time you have already learned how this class works. And of course there's plenty of material. There's a lot of notes that you can take from those videos. You can even write more. I mean, there's been students that have written extensively. I'm not telling you that you should write 20 pages. No, I'm not saying that. But again, 5 full pages seems sensible here. Considering the amount of data that I've presented here. And so for part two, you can write as many pages as you like. I've seen students in the past writing anywhere between 1 to 1.5 pages for just one key term. Just imagine. Okay, so again, it's very, very possible that you can write extensively, and that's the final exam. This is the last major test of the course. So it is very possible that you can actually again accomplish this. Okay, so once again, as a whole, the entire work must contain lecture material only. Okay, no outside sources such as books, internet, online encyclopedia, articles, video documentaries or anything like that. Okay, it's very important because if I start reading something that I did not present, it's going to affect your grade. It all depends how much I see. If it's substantial, your work will be disqualified, period. Otherwise, there will be significant points taken off, again, if I start really reading material that I did not present. Okay. Part one and part two must be saved in a single document. Please include a heading, that indicates where's part one and where's part two. So as you're moving into part two, I'm expecting that you at least indicate this is part two. Just put a separation, a heading that will separate those two parts. But those two parts must be in a single document. In this case, Word. I prefer Word or PDF. At the end, you can actually save it on a PDF file. But please upload it either as a Word doc or PDF on Blackboard. There's already an upload tab there on Submit Work. by Friday, July the 2nd. Okay. By the end of the day. So before the end of the day, 11:59. Okay. Um, PM, just upload it again on Blackboard there. Okay. So again, this is very, very similar to the exams we've had in the past. Okay. Not much has changed. So if you're already, completed the first and second exam, you're already very, very acquainted, very familiar again with the format. So we're keeping the format, that is to say. So again, this is all I have for you. Um, I wish you luck, and please be diligent watching those video recordings, the lectures, taking many notes as possible, and be working on this exam as you go. I recommend that you do little by little each day. Don't leave everything at the very end. Again, that's just my advice, but that's just me. Okay, that's all I have for you. If you have any questions, please let me know. Write me an email and I'll be responding immediately. Okay, thank you.